So let's talk about the Mississippi runoff. I did record a Sunday video. Since the one last week did so poorly, I'm gonna have her postpone editing that until, maybe we don't have anything else going on. This is a way more interesting story. Do the Democrats have a chance of taking this traditionally red state? So in this race, we have Republican Cindy Hyde-Smith running against Democrat Mike Espy. And Cindy Hyde-Smith is technically an incumbent, although she's not an elected incumbent. And she has been ahead in most polls. She also won the general election, but she didn't win it by a particularly high margin. Not as much as one would expect of somebody who is an incumbent candidate in a state that really favors her political party. And really the main reason for this is that Cindy Hyde-Smith has a bit of a foot in her mouth problem. And unfortunately for Cindy Hyde-Smith, her foot in mouth problem seems to really circulate around racism, which is a particularly big problem for somebody running in Mississippi. Mississippi is one of those deep South states that has a pretty troubling history with things like the Ku Klux Klan, where things like lynching and racially motivated acts of violence that were almost like publicly accepted are a much, much more recent memory than they are in a lot of other places in the United States. It's one of her major slip-ups in recent time. As illustrated in this tweet here, she had said, "If he invited me to a public hanging, I'd be on the front row," in regards to Colin Hutchinson, a cattle rancher who supported her. Now again, look, you have to consider this is Mississippi. If somebody said this to me here in Florida, if somebody invoked the idea of a public hanging, I kind of think like gallows, medieval times, criminals being given the death penalty. But in Mississippi, hanging has much more of the undertones of a race thing, more invoking imagery of lynching and things like that again are not too distant history in Mississippi. In Mississippi, these are things that were not unheard of in people's lifetimes who are still voting right now. Now look, understand something here, and especially if you're coming to this video as somebody who doesn't know me, right? And my intent here is not to say that you shouldn't vote for Cindy Hyde-Smith. My intent here is simply to analyze this race and look at really how it might turn out and why. And at the end of the day, when I look at this race and I look at the polls and I look at the demographics of the area and I look at the candidates and their platforms, what I really see here is not Cindy Hyde-Smith versus Mike Espy. It's Cindy Hyde-Smith versus Cindy Hyde-Smith. And you can even see this in the public response, like the supporter response to this comment. One of the major things that happened was that around the time that this comment was made, Major League Baseball, the MLB, made a $5,000, which is the limit, contribution to Cindy Hyde-Smith's campaign. They immediately, upon finding out about this comment, asked for that donation to be returned to them. And that kind of makes sense. Major League Baseball is a huge institution and they have a lot of African American players in the game, and they want to promote an image of diversity. And so for their public relations, they can't be seen attaching themselves to this person who, even if she didn't mean it in that way, if you're going to be a politician, you do have to consider, especially on the campaign trail, the way that the public is going to perceive your comments, not just the way that maybe you intended them. And that's giving her the benefit of the doubt and assuming that she didn't really understand the meaning behind her comments. There is also an image which was on her Facebook that a lot of people have been critical of, wherein she is holding a rifle at a Civil War type museum and wearing a Confederate soldier's cap. And the picture was titled Mississippi History at its Best. So again, look, I am not the type of person who supports shying away from the bad parts of history, right? I don't think that a nation should ignore the bad parts of its history. I don't think that any particular group of people should ignore the bad parts of their history, because that sets us up to repeat the mistakes of our ancestors. However, to call the Confederacy and the Civil War the best of Mississippi history definitely comes off a little bit wrong. And again, maybe what Cindy Hyde-Smith meant here was that the museum and, reenactments of history and things like that are the best of Mississippi history, that, living history is the best. But that's not how it comes off. And when you're talking about a political election, when you're talking about a public political image, you have to consider how people are going to take the things that you say, and not just how you actually mean them. And look, that's not even specifically a politician thing. Like, it's especially important for them because they have to get voted on. But even here on YouTube, like, when I watch back my videos after Maria edits them, I sit there and I listen to it and I'm like, all right, how can somebody maybe misinterpret some of the things that I say? And either I will go back and have her cut certain things out later on because I think they can be easily misinterpreted, or I will pin a comment clarifying what I meant by something. Because what a lot of people fail to understand is that perception is reality, right? It doesn't matter what your intent was when you said something, when you're talking about public consideration, right? Only how people are going to perceive it, because we don't know what your intent was. You can tell us anything. I could say something incredibly obviously racist, and later on I could say, well, my intent was not to be racist. Maybe I'm telling the truth, maybe I'm lying. There's no way to know, right? So you really do have to consider those things, especially in this day and age. And again, you have to consider the place and the time, right? And to give you a further example, and a reason that somebody might not be so quick to take Cindy Hyde-Smith at her word when she says that she doesn't mean anything by this stuff, and another in itself stark reminder of how recent the history of these problems is in Mississippi, is that Cindy Hyde-Smith herself attended a school known as Lawrence County Academy in Brookhaven, Mississippi. And apparently, according to what I've read, this is what people refer to as a segregation academy, where basically in states like Mississippi, which again was really slow to enforce segregation, with the governor not even stepping in to enforce it until 1970, which is a full 16 years after Brown versus Board of Education. But this was one of a series of private schools created that had certain barriers to entry, either unstated policies or very high enrollment costs, which were intended to get around integration and allow white children to continue to attend segregated schools where they would not have to go to school with black students. And this school in particular even went so far as to have a Confederate general as its mascot. So look, is Cindy Hyde-Smith a racist? I don't know. I have no way of knowing that. As I said earlier, you can't dig into somebody's mind and find out the actual intentions behind something that they say. But at the same time, I see where her detractors are coming from, and you also can't just take people's word for everything either, because obviously they're always going to spin everything in the most favorable light possible. But at the end of the day, I've never made it a habit to endorse or oppose any particular political candidate. The only reason that I chose to focus pretty much exclusively on Cindy Hyde-Smith and not really talk much about Mike Espy at all is that he's a pretty white bread candidate as far as a Southern Democratic candidate goes. And Cindy Hyde-Smith it's her race to lose, and she does seem to be making a concerted effort to do exactly that. From every report that I've seen, the left's voter base is a lot more energized here, and that's important because in this runoff, voter turnout is going to be totally key, right? Whoever can get most of their voter base to show up at the polls for this runoff election is going to be the person who wins. Obviously, Republicans have a huge advantage because they have a much larger voter base in Mississippi to work with. But Cindy Hyde-Smith is just a really poor candidate, or has done a really poor job as a candidate, however you want to look at it. However, she does have one huge saving grace. Donald Trump is coming. No matter what you personally may think of Donald Trump, you cannot deny the fact that the right, and especially certain new conservatives, really get energized around that guy. He really has a way of rallying his voter base behind him, and I think that will be the deciding factor in this race. By the time this video goes up, Donald Trump will likely already be in Mississippi, and while there are certain people who plan to protest his visit there, let's be honest, those people are not people who would have voted for Cindy Hyde-Smith to begin with, and their protest is kind of irrelevant as a result. And I do think the huge Republican majority compared to Democrats in the state of Mississippi, along with Donald Trump's arrival, are enough to keep Cindy Hyde-Smith's struggling campaign afloat, and I do think she has about a 75% chance to win this election. I do want to throw a huge caveat on that, though. Given the demographics of the state, given the lack of really history that Mike Espy has, and the lack of political clout that he has, there is no reason that Cindy Hyde-Smith should have anything less than a 100% chance to win this race. The reason that this race is close at all is because of her missteps, and I think it's an important lesson to learn. I think it's an important thing for candidates in the future going forward to consider. As politicians, we need to keep it in our heads that we're not all Donald Trump. Not everybody can do what Donald Trump does. For the vast majority of us, the wisest decision sometimes is to limit our public speaking, or at the very least, seriously consider the things that we say that are going to be scrutinized by the public. Because even if Cindy Hyde-Smith meant nothing bad by any of the things that she has said or done, the fact of the matter is there's just too much there to not consider it as a voter. But anyway, guys, that's all I've got to say. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. I will see you in the next video. Have a great night, and peace.